Hello everyone, my name is Pillar. I am one of the CAs for Bristol Open 2024, and I'm going to give you the speaker briefing. So what we're going to discuss is the absolute basics of the BB format, then the motion types, how you're going to bring models, then we're going to go into a bit more technical detail about closing halves, POIs, and prep time. Well, let's start. So overall, we're going to discuss an idea, and there you're going to have people who are going to be in favor of the idea, they're going to be proposing, they're going to be the government side, or you're going to be against the idea, you're going to be in opposition. Now, each side, proposition, opposition, has two different teams who have different prep times, different speeches, and also should have different arguments. And it's important because they can also have different positions. So if, for example, the team that is the first team in proposition takes a first, it is very much possible for the second team in proposition side to take a fourth. Okay, to just go a bit into detail which words are used to describe to people, so people all know what we are referring to. You have the opening half, which is the first proposition and the first opposition, who have first speakers, which are the prime minister on government side, or the leader of opposition on opposition side. You have second speaker, which argues then the deputy prime minister or the deputy leader of opposition. These are oftentimes then shortened into PM for prime minister, DPM for deputy prime minister, etc. I think you get the gist of this. Now, for closing halves, the naming convention is a bit easier, where you have the first speaker being called the member of either government or opposition, and then the second speaker is called the government whip and the opposition whip. Now, how you exactly bring arguments differing from your opening half, something we're going to discuss in the speaker talk. This is just going to be the basics of the words and terminology used to describe teams and speakers within the debate. Okay, we're going to have some info slides in this tournament. And the reason is just that we want to clarify key terms and we want to make sure that everyone has like a same understanding of specific concepts so that the debate just becomes balanced, becomes very neat, and we don't have any challenges on definitions that are going to be unfair or just going to messy up the debate. So for the purposes of this debate and for a lot of the debates that you're going to be debating in the future, use the information in the info slide and assume that it is just true and indisputable. In real life, there might be more nuances and different ways that the word is used, or it might not even refer exactly to the concept that is used in the info slide. However, it is oftentimes just done to make sure that the debate is balanced or that it doesn't become too complex by just adding more and more nuances. Now, if there are nuances that you can add to the information slide, then in the debate, you can bring that extra information. The thing is just you need to still explain why it is important and why it is likely true, because it is not part of the info slide and therefore it is not indisputable. So other side can dispute what you're saying. If you have a question about the info slide, only ask the CA team for clarifications and only do so at the moment you have seen the slide. So don't do this like 12 minutes into prep time. Only do this when you see the motion and see the info slide and things are unclear. So do it at the start of preparation time, because others might not have access to the answers that we're going to give, which means that the clarification becomes null because they just know if that is part of the indisputable information or not, but also other teams don't have access to it, which might make it unfair. So for all these reasons, just do it in the beginning of prep time and do it at like the main hall in which we're going to show you the motion and info slide. Now, what are motions then? So our motions are just going to be the broad idea that we're going to discuss, the topic of the debate. These are phrased as this house, which is then followed by some kind of verb. What these verbs are is what we're going to explain in the next slides. And there are overall just three different types of motion that we have. We have policy motions, we have motions, and we have actor motions. And we're going to discuss all three of these. So let's just start immediately with policy motions. So one example would be this house would X. So the example would be this house would ban commercial airlines. The motion takes place in countries where the policy reasonably can be put in. So not necessarily Western states, not necessarily the UK, and not necessarily like liberal democracies, just anywhere where are commercial airlines and where you can therefore ban them. The question you should ask yourself is, overall, in general, for the abstract viewer, do we believe that the policy will do more good than harm. Like, is it good or is it bad to do the specific policy? An important feature of policy motions is that government has fiat. So when they say we're going to ban commercial airlines, opposition cannot make any arguments about, but we currently have a right-wing or conservative government and they would never implement this, so this will not happen. That's not the case. Another important part of fiat is that if they give a specific model, a reasonable model, such as we're going to do this over a time span of 10 years, we're going to slowly build off commercial airlines, that's actually fine. And opposition cannot dispute this because they have the fiat to give a model of how they're going to implement this. How these models exactly look like is how we're going to discuss later, but it's again important to highlight that government side can bring this model, and this model cannot be disputed unless it's unfair. Now, you also have the motion, this House believes that X should Y. It's also a policy motion. So when you have a motion such as this House believes that airports should create game rooms, then these things is going to be implemented by the airports, but we still ask ourselves, is it in general good to do this policy? And the idea is still that the government side has fiat, so they can bring a specific model. So again, here you can say the model is that all the games in the gamer room are going to be free. And then again, opposition cannot say that this is what will happen because they have the fiat. Again, it's just because we want to have motions where other actors tend to do something, but we still want to discuss if it's overall a good or a bad thing to do. Now, analysis motions. Analysis are different from policy motions in the sense that they don't have any fiat, they don't have any model they can bring. It's still that they need to ask in general, is it good or bad to the specific motion? So if you have a motion, which is this House supports something, or you have a motion, which is this House opposes something, then you just need to ask yourself, is this thing in general good? So this House supports the expansion of airports. Government says it is good to have expansion. Opposition says it is bad to have this expansion. And then it is about the current state of affairs, like how does this look like right now? Now you also have this House believes that X motions. So for example, this House believes that airports do more harm than good. At the moment, you don't see a shoot after this House believes that, then that means that it is an analysis motion, which means, again, you don't have any fiat. The question that you need to ask yourself is, in this example, quite literally, is it that airports overall do more harm for individuals or the world, or do they do more good than harm? And you can, of course, give definitions of how airports look like. But again, there's a definition that can, to a certain extent, be challenged. It can be added upon in debate. You don't have a specific model that you can bring on how these airports will look like or how governments will regulate airports. Now, we're going to get a bit more complex here with this House prefers X over Y motions. So the example here is just this House prefers trains over planes. The question that you just need to ask yourself is, overall, do we think that trains are better than planes, or do we think that planes are better than trains? And this is important because opposition side needs to defend planes in this motion. It specifically gives you the comparative. However, at the moment, there might not be a comparative. So you could have a motion along the lines of this House prefers a world in which trains are free. Then the opposition side needs to defend the status quo in which trains aren't free. But they cannot just say that there's going to be a new comparative. So they can say, but actually we're going to defend a world in which there are only going to be cars and just trains don't exist in the first place. That's just not fair. Another important thing to note is at the moment you have like this House prefers a world motion. This also becomes a historical motion. So at the moment you have the motion along the lines of this House prefers a world in which bikes are the only mode of transport. Then this would have been that cars would have never existed in the past. So you can make arguments, for example, that World War I and World War II would look significantly different if we didn't have motorized vehicles. And then you can explain why it would be good, why it would be bad, and all this kind of stuff. So it's important to highlight that, again, this is a historical motion and that you can argue things about the past and you need to explain how the world would have developed if something would have changed. Now, you have the other motion, which is this House regrets. So we have the example here, this House regrets commercial airplane lines. This is also a historical motion. And this is just a bit more explicit. So we just ask ourselves, would the world have been a better place without commercial airplane lines existing? You have the benefit of hindsight, so you can make arguments about, in the past we've seen this, this, and this, but you also do still need to describe how the alternative world, so a world without commercial airplane lines, how that would look like. Now we're going to get into the two spicy motions, which are relatively new. So you have this house predicts motions. This house predicts are just about, is it likely that the event will happen or not? So is it likely that airports will be absolute within 100 years? And the question that you need to ask yourself is, all the information in debate, do I think it is more likely or less likely? It's like a burden of like 50-50%. That given all the information, I would lean 51% in favor or 51% against the motion, at least. And yeah, it's just explaining, is it likely to happen or not? And then you just give reasons why it's likely to happen or not necessarily whether this is a good thing. So you don't argue that airports, becoming absolute is a good thing. So there's other form of analysis motion, which is a this house hopes motions. So the example here would be this house hopes that airports will be absolute. So this is a motion where you're going to discuss, do we think overall, will it be a better place at the moment that airports have become absolute? Or do we think that it is just a good thing that will happen? So there is a moral aspect here. There is a subjective aspect here. There is a funky thing with preconditions with these kinds of motions. So if there's a precondition for this to happen on GOV side, then the same happens on upside. So to give an example, at the moment that you're going to say that a preconditions for airports becoming obsolete is that train fares are becoming quite low and trains actually run relatively well, that people can use them. If that is the condition to this, then opposition has the exact same. So opposition still has that train fares are relatively cheap and that people are able to use it, but airports just don't become obsolete. And then you still need to make arguments whether that's overall good or overall bad, but these preconditions become symmetric, so they apply to both sides. That's important to keep in mind. Now, I think we now are going to be on the last motion. Yeah, the last motion is an actor motion. This can be combined with either a analysis motion or a policy motion. So the motion here can be this house as an airport owner would cater to private plane owners. So we see that this is now a combination with a policy motion because we see the word would. The question that you then ask yourself is, from the perspective of X, so the knowledge that you have, the interest that you have, and the specific values that you have, would it overall be good to cater to private plane owners or not? I want to already give a couple of warning signs. The first one is, this house believes that X should Y is not an actor motion. This is just a motion about whether a policy should be implemented, not whether it will be good for that actor to implement that motion. That's what this motion is about. Also note that oftentimes people are principled. So, having a motion about principles or an argument about principles are still relevant in debate and should not be locked out a priori. Also, it is about what is within the actor's interest, not necessarily what the actor would do. So if the actor would do something that would be very bad for them, so I don't know, maybe they would sell all their money, go party, and then just, have no money until they're 40 years old, then you could say that's not in the interest. So that's not something that the actor should do, even if they would do it. Okay, let's now go on to the next slide. Now, let's talk about the definitions and the policies of fiat that we already talked about a bit. So there are a couple of things that you should not do. So at the moment, you're going to give a model or a definition. What you should do is you should not limit the debate. So to a very specific time or a specific place, because it is only set in countries in which we can reasonably expect the motion to take place. So if you have the motion, this house will legalize all drugs, you cannot say that the model will be only in Amsterdam and only for 2 seconds long. You can also not advance something that is against the spirit of the motion. So if you're going to talk about drugs, then you're going to say, we're going to only talk about medicinal drugs. The idea is just to have a nice debate, and you will be punished for not making the debate fair and trying to pull it towards your side. So what you can do is you can give a detailed model or implementation, and you can add some caveats, right? So at the moment you have illicit drugs, then clearly you can just say that you have to be over 18 or 21, or whatever years you want to consume drugs. And you can also say there's going to be regulations on how these drugs are going to be created and sold. These are all possible things that you can do. This is also important. Closing teams are bound by openings models. So they can add somewhat reasonable caveats, right? So at the moment that opening government in this house would legalize drug drugs motion. Does not say a specific thing about governments checking on them. You can say, look, anything that is legal is checked by the government, and anything has regulation. So you can just explain why it is fair to expect the government would do the same thing for legal drugs, and you can explain how this would most likely look like. Also, this is important, I already highlighted this, on opposition side, you cannot make any arguments about Parliament just not implementing the model. So you can just assume the legislation will pass. Of course, you can still make arguments on opposition side that there's going to be backlash or there's going to be some problems with implementation. And you can say that it can become very hard, or people just do not opt in, the police won't regulate this for all of these reasons. That is okay, but it's not okay to argue that the government will not implement this. So definition challenges. Let's say someone gives a definition and you don't agree with it. Immediately gut check with yourself. Do you genuinely think that this is an unreasonable interpretation, or is this just not the interpretation you would have liked or had thought of during prep time? If it is very legitimate, then just continue the debate, because the debate will become extremely messy at the moment you're going to do a definition challenge. And also, again, oftentimes debates are also made in such a way that definition challenges shouldn't be the main thing you should focus on. Oftentimes the definitions that are going to be brought up are going to be fair and going to be good on either side. So let's say you generally, for some reason, think that it is just unfair. So it's the legalizing drugs and it's only for like a specific age group, like 28 to 29 for some reason. Then what you need to do is you need to explain why the definition is unreasonable. Then you need to propose an alternative definition. And then you also need to justify that alternative. But then in that case, you still need to engage with arguments based on the original definition. And that's what makes it so complex, because you now, as a judge, need to see what response do you already brought, what is like a genuine good definition that I agree with, do I think it is unfair, all of the stuff, which might make it extremely, extremely messy. This is also important. At the moment you want to challenge this can only be done by leader of opposition or by a POI to the prime minister. So if you're closing half and the prime minister does not take a POI and the leader of opposition does not challenge it, then sadly you cannot challenge the definition, because teams do not have the possibility in opening half to respond to this. And yeah, so you cannot challenge this if you are, for example, a member of opposition. Now, counter props. If you have a policy motion, so this house would, or this house believes that X should Y, the leader of opposition can propose a counter policy. So what you can say is you can decriminalize drugs instead of legalizing it. The thing is, the counter props must be mutually exclusive to the prop case. And what's also important is only OO has the fiat that you want to set a counter policy. So closing opposition cannot do another counter fiat. They might do something similar to what CG does, which is explaining why it is likely or reasonable that the counter model will have specific things, such as, governments regulating something, but you don't have necessarily fiat. You can just explain why it's kind of like likely for this to happen. Also, it's important that OO needs to use the same amount of fiat as OG does. So you cannot just have a grandiose thing. So you can say, so we're not gonna legalize it, but we're just going to decriminalize it, and then we're going to spend billions of dollars in rehabs and education and all of this stuff. That's not reasonable, because the amount of money it would take to do all of those plans would be more than the money that it would take to just legalize something. And therefore that would be overextending what power you have, and therefore you cannot implement it. Let's talk about closing halves. Closing halves need to bring an extension. And an extension can be anything, right? So it can be explicitly a new argument, a new explanation of something, a new impact, new rebuttal, all of the stuff. But again, just because something is an extension does not mean it is a winning extension or that it is meaningfully better than others. That's why we would significantly recommend to explain to your judge why your case is not only different, but also better than what is stated in opening half. And this is also important for whips, because the whips can add new responses, can add new examples, can just kind of work out ideas that were already in the speech, can give new forms of weighing or framing, explaining why something is important, all of those kinds of things. However, they cannot make new arguments. And the kind of thing you should ask yourself as a whip is, can I reasonably expect myself to bring this new piece of material? So if you're going to bring new weighing, then clearly new weighing is something you can expect from a whip, because expect whips to explain why something is important. So weighing is always fine. But at the moment you have a completely new piece of analysis, which comes completely out of left field, isn't necessarily rebuttal, but it's just a new reason why we should or should not do something. Then you could say, I would not expect myself to run this. I cannot reasonably expect that I would bring this, therefore I should not bring this into whip speech. Okay, now PYs. PYs are just a question or statement that are 10 to 15 seconds long. After 50 seconds, the chair should call order, because you're now overextending the time that's allotted to you. And this is also important. It is not meant to be a back and forth. So it's not the case that the speaker that responds to this and then you stand up again and then respond to that kind of thing. It may be the case that the speaker just does not understand what you're saying. They may ask you to repeat the question, and at that point you might stand up and then repeat the question. That is fine, but it's not meant to be like, oh, I'm going to react to what your reaction is. Again, it's also possible for the speaker to cut you off, because maybe they feel like they already understand the question. They already have an idea of what you're going to say, or it takes too long, or you're repeating yourself, all of this stuff. I do want to note that it is very important for speakers to only do this reasonably, because oftentimes I think judges might not know what the other speaker is saying and really would like for the speaker to finish the sentence. So don't do this too quickly, because that means that basically the PY is equivalent to not being taken, which means you've taken a PY, but you haven't taken a PY because the judge just doesn't know exactly what the PY was going to be. So to speakers, please do this reasonably. And also for people asking the PY, be reasonable in how long your PY is and what the information contains. This PY can only be asked between the first minute and the 6th minute of speech. And we are going to give 7-minute speeches. We will encourage people to take 1 PY per speech. And also want to note that according to the manual, we can and will punish you for not taking and offering PYs, either by speaker points or in close comparisons. Also, at the moment, you're going to be asking PYs. It can be very annoying that someone doesn't take a PY, but it does not mean that you should badger the individuals with more and more PYs. So what you should do is you should wait at least 15 to 30 seconds between PYs. You should not try to just like shout PY in the middle of someone saying something continuously. That's going to be very distracting. It's not going to be very nice. It does not make people feel welcome. So again, just be reasonable with PYs. Be reasonable in the way you ask them, in the way that you take them, in the way that you cut them off, all of these things. Now, prep time, which is going to be the last thing that we're going to discuss. We're going to release the motion, and then you have 15 minutes for preparation. You can only prepare with your partner, and you cannot prepare with friends, other teams, etc. And you can ask questions about the motion, but only to the CA team. And like I said, this has to be within a specific time. Also, at the moment that you do have time, and you do have had the time to prep, it's important to note that you should not go to the room that you need to go to after 50 minutes. We should already do that beforehand, specifically in this tournament, because we have a relatively tight schedule. So at the moment, we still need to look for teams, or you still need to look for rooms. It's going to drag us along. And it also means we might have not as much time for deliberation, which means your arguments are not going to be taken to the full extent, or not discussed to the full extent. It's only going to harm yourself. So please, please, please go to the room before you actually finish prep, so that we can start on time. Another thing, you are not allowed to have any internet access. You're not allowed to have any like research that you do, Wikipedia. What you can do is you can use things such as your phone for like time, or a dictionary if you just don't know what a specific word means, or you need to translate words to different languages to make yourself understand. And that's it. Oh yeah, last thing, feedback. We expect you to fill in feedback. Feedback is actually very useful. Please also not just grade people, just don't give them 1 number and just have no comments. If you give, for example, someone a 3, explain to us what it is that you did not like about them. Is it that their away took way too long, or just wasn't fair or was not, tracking you well, all of the stuff. Because at the moment, we actually have multiple people explaining to us what happened. We can better assess what the quality of judge are, or where we might need to help them. So we might need to put someone in the room who is better at tracking so they can come to a better call, all of the stuff. But we can only do that with your help. So please tell us if a judge is good, if it is bad, what the strengths are, what the weaknesses are, and why you liked or didn't like the OA or personal feedback. Also, it's very important to fill in feedback so we can just have a meritocratic break so that we make sure that the right people break for this tournament. Okay, this was the speaker briefing. If you have any specific questions, you can ask them either in the tournament in person, or you can put them in the comments below and I will try to answer them. Okay, see you at the tournament.